Today, my special guest is Theresa Hubbard. Theresa is a licensed therapist who specializes in neurofeedback, so brain optimization, and I'm really, really excited to share her with you today.
So neurofeedback is really about helping the brain improve its communication, for it to become more efficient in how it is talking amongst itself, so that when we have an intention, that we can reach it. And again, not just a goal, but can we access joy? Can we access peace? Can we access compassion, without having to stop at all those detours and picking up things that might get
Opening
in our
all
way.
the different boxes
Right.
that are in our brain. We don't have to look for it in each different box.
Right. I was at a conference and I was sitting at a table with a bunch of therapists that were actually in the military, and they were talking about neurofeedback and biofeedback, and that was my exposure. And they were like, you should try this. And so came back to Kansas City and just started doing research to see who did. And at the time, there were not many practitioners. 7 years ago, there were a few who had been doing it for a very long time.
And do those people, did they have, were they neurologists too?
No.
Because I think that is such an interesting piece of the neurofeedback, is it's the brain. So you would think there would be some piece that would be, neurologists would.
Right. That's a really good question. No, the majority of people that do it are mental health professionals. So when a neurologist typically is looking at it, they are looking at an EEG from a medical diagnosis perspective. So this brainwave pattern indicates that you have seizures. So that is not how a mental health professional looks at it. There are some nurses actually that do neurofeedback. They're also looking at it from a behavioral perspective. You do have to be a licensed healthcare provider in order to do the type of neurofeedback that I do. There are some neurofeedback programs that anybody can do, as long as you have the money to buy the equipment. But the type that we use, mental health professionals, it's an FDA regulated, you need to be licensed with the state equipment. And when we're looking at brain waves, we're looking to see how does the dysregulation in this brain typically manifest in this person's life from a symptom perspective. And so, like we've talked about before, it's not always mental health. It can be, I do pretty well in life, but I want to do better at this. I want to be able to focus better. I want to be able to be more relaxed. I want to be on the top of my game. There's that piece. And so we can look at the brain waves, do what we call a baseline, and just see, what is regulated, what is dysregulated, and then share with someone what is their experience, what do they want to improve, and then target the neurofeedback based off what we see and what their goals are. And then there are people who it is, they come in with attention deficit issues. They experience, so self-reporting, anxiety or depression. We have people that come in that are on the autism spectrum. I mean, the amount of research that's been done around neurofeedback is incredibly extensive. So, neurofeedback has been around, for 80 years, actively researched, more recently, and then prior to the 70s. So the psychiatric medication started coming out, research kind of stopped, or essentially stopped, I think for about, 10, 15, 20 years, and then it started, back up again. And there's a lot more being done these days. As the amount of research around the brain has continued to increase the last decade, it is significant. And so there are, sleep disorders, tinnitus, Tourette's. The list is long. And then there are people that we work with also who have had traumatic brain injury, or a TBI or an ABI, who maybe they have lost their sense of taste or smell, or they can't access words as well. It's extensive, but it is brain communication issue. So actually I had a client this morning, she and her husband have both had it, and it just changed their world because they are able to communicate now in a way that they just never could before. And she was saying that they were out with some friends, and they were talking, and he said, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but she said it was like, he said, it's like I'm trying to call San Diego and I end up calling someone in New York, so, like there's this intention that you have to get from here to there, but the brain wiring is not efficient between those two places. And so maybe it's going over here and connecting, picking up some anxiety along the way, or going this way and picking up some hypervigilance along the way, or it's going this way and it's hitting a depression place. And that's a really simple way of talking about it. But it is, the brain is dysregulated. So maybe we have like bursts of brain waves that get in the way. Maybe the amplitude of certain brain waves is too high or too low. And then maybe there's not much symmetry. Maybe when we're doing the baseline, no matter where I put the electrode, it's a completely different reading.
I think that one of the things that I found really interesting, because like obviously I've done neurofeedback, and I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed, and there was the two different kinds. I only did the one. What are the two different kinds?
So active and passive. There's a lot of different names, but active is what most people are familiar with if they've done neurofeedback. And that's essentially where you play a video game with your brain.
Right.
That was
exhausting. Right? My brain was so tired. Yes.
It is. But that ability, no matter what brain waves we're working on, that ability to learn to focus and relax at the same time is so powerful. Because most of us, if we're focused, we're somewhat anxious. And if we're relaxed, we're not very focused. And so teaching the body to be focused and relaxed at the same time is really powerful.
And not to move your head to try to get, it's not going to help get that in through the hoop by moving around. You've got to
just letting go. Yeah. Right.
It's such a huge step.
It is, right. Because the harder we try, the less successful we are.
Yes.
That active neurofeedback.
And then the passive, I think that's the one that I personally enjoyed the most out of the two, because I enjoyed talking to you, obviously, through it, because I always got a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, processing. The passive neurofeedback definitely allows that opportunity. Yes, so the passive neurofeedback, using a small electrical stimulation, it's reading your brain waves constantly. And it's saying, okay, that brain wave is higher. So it's looking for coherence. Like, are the brain waves working well together? And so the computer's reading that, and it's saying, no, that one's too high, or that one's too low. And it's sending a signal back constantly saying, okay, if it's too low, come on up. And if it's too high, come on down. It's typically very relaxing. Some people fall asleep during it. I tend to do sessions with eyes open and eyes closed, because I want the difference in the brain's communication, for us to be helping regulate that. It's a very peaceful experience, and it's cumulative. Just both neurofeedbacks are, the more often you do it, the more you're strengthening those new neural networks that we're asking the brain to create, so that it works more efficiently. So it is a very peaceful experience. Passive neurofeedback.
I enjoyed it a lot. I feel like there's nothing like going and getting a little brain work. It's like having a massage for your brain. And just the optimizing your performance is great. But for me personally, the reason I did neurofeedback is because with the different traumas I've had throughout life, and I had, lost my husband, I thought too, it was really interesting how you could see on the EEG, like the different traumas, like the ages that you were at, or approximate ages that you're at, like
looking
the different
at brain development, right?
That really coincided with things that had happened in my story.
Right.
And the fact that doing that made me feel less crazy,
Mm.
between, the additional impact of David dying and then getting dropped on my head.
Right.
So I had the brain injury was the reason I finally came
Right.
and knew that it could be something that would help, because I was really having trouble with my thoughts and processing.
Right.
And I had always been so driven, and I really like my brain a lot. Really, really like my brain. So it was really challenging to feel like you can't recall the things that you want to say, and it's embarrassing. And then you make your hypervigilance even worse, because then you're like beating yourself up because your brain isn't optimized.
Right.
When instead you have to give yourself compassion, look for resources to fix that challenge, because, worrying or kicking yourself because of the past is so unproductive.
So unproductive. Yeah. Tammy, it's such a great, I'm glad you brought it up. It is, our culture particularly, we are, if you're not succeeding, it's because you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
And that is true, for some people. But as we've talked about before, most people really are trying to do well. And we don't take into consideration, at least not very often, and hopefully it's growing, how our brain processes. We really have this ridiculous notion that we're all born with a similar brain, and we think the same way, and we process the same way, or we should.
We communicate the same way. And when people talk to us, they're really making, they're really trying to make us upset.
Right.
But they're not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so, understanding that, neurodiversity, and not just from a diagnostic perspective, it's just real. It's no different than us having different hair color and eye color and height and weight and anything. Our brains, like everything else, has a certain function, but they're all different.
Yeah.
And so even with neurofeedback, we operate within parameters, not like perfect alpha 10.1 or whatever. Like, that's not the goal of neurofeedback, to get you to that. That would make an assumption that your brain would work optimally with that level of alpha, and that may not be true.
Right.
And
so what are the brain waves?
Well, the ones that we work, essentially you work with all of them. If you're working with one, you're working with all of them. It's just where's the focus. So delta, all of our brainwaves are there all the time.
Right.
Let me start by saying that.
Okay.
So it's not like, oh, we just have one functioning. They're all functioning. It's like,
that was just me.
Right.
Most people. Totally kidding.
It's like, who's in charge?
Yes.
So delta would be our sleep brainwave.
Okay.
And so theta, in my experience, I think the easiest way to describe it that people can connect to is it's that state that you go through when you're waking up or going to sleep, where you're like, am I awake or asleep right now? I'm not sure. You are awake because you're having the conversation with yourself, but, but you're not really, it's that in-between place. It's also where people are trying to get to with deep meditation or prayer. That place where you are so settled that you could be asleep, but you're not. That part of your conscious brain is still active. But it's a nice, peaceful place.
Yeah.
If you have a good amount of it, not too much, not too little.
Because if you had too much, you were going to want to sleep all the time?
Well, interesting question. So typically people that have too much theta are people that have true ADD or ADHD. And again, like, it manifests differently. So the brain, when we have too much theta, it is like it thinks it's going to sleep all the time. And so whether we are continually looking for something to keep our attention, to keep our brain awake, or we are moving all the time, it's like it's a coping mechanism that we have adapted, because our brain does think it's going to sleep all the time. And so that is a true attention issue. We have too much theta. And so if we were doing neurofeedback on someone, we are training that specific brainwave to be more regulated.
Okay.
So not just, nice and, pretty and fluid, but also typically at a lower number. So, the ranges are wide, but theta, 11, 12, 13, 14. But then, you get people come in, it's like 25. I mean, it is high. And so, but the higher you get, the more it impairs your ability to stay focused. Your brain, again, is needing that stimulation. That's why stimulants work for people who truly have it, because it keeps them awake. It's a medicine stimulant versus an external stimulant, whether it's movement or taking in information. So if someone says they have ADHD and they take a stimulant and it's not helpful, or it's even actually impairs them more, they don't have it. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, yes.
So that's theta. And then alpha is our feel-good brainwave. I mean, it's the one that we're hanging out with friends and having a good time. We're not in big philosophical discussions. We're just having a nice time. Most people are trying to achieve alpha, a nice amount of alpha. So if you don't have enough alpha, you tend to be exhausted. If you have too much alpha, you tend to be hypervigilant. So you have this feel-good brainwave. It's if it's in a good place, it's nice. But when it's too much or too little, again, like everything else, it affects our experience, how our brain communicates.
And I can talk a little bit about
Sure.
the too much, because that is a challenge that I have had, depending on the day, maybe.
Sure.
Was too much alpha and the hypervigilance, which is interesting to know what that is now. I think that more than anything, to understand that this living in a state of fear is not me being crazy.
Right.
I'm not paranoid that somebody's going to attack me. I'm just very aware of my surroundings. And I find that, like, large crowds of loud people is really, really uncomfortable. And for a long time, I thought that that's because I'm empathic.
Right.
And maybe it has a little bit to do with it.
Sure.
And picking up everybody's energy. But more than anything, I feel scared in really big crowds sometimes, not always, but just depending on how loud it is. And knowing that that is just a function of years and years of trauma. And, our brains were developed when we were cave people and we needed to be able to survive. I've just had, an interesting amount of traumas that my brain is just on.
Right. On.
It's on, always on.
It's on. Right. And there's so much that goes into it, Tammy, neurofeedback. It's fascinating because, as we continue to work on our brain, getting healthier, other aspects of our life change too.
Yeah.
Maybe we focus more on how much we exercise, or the kind of food we eat, or whether we watch TV or not, or just, we start to pay more attention to the amount of stimulation that comes in. Because when we have that overwhelm, sometimes it's the crowd, sometimes it's because we didn't sleep well, or maybe we ate fast food for breakfast, or maybe we have a cold, or like all of those things impact how our brain and our body communicates. And so I mean, we could have been stimulated from an argument the day before, and our brain and our body just has not had time to calm down yet. And the hypervigilance piece, in my experience, hypervigilance is like in your body. It is like your brain is on, and it's saying, I need to stay on, even if I'm asleep. And so it's hard to get good rest because our brain stays on. It's always ready to leap into action. Whereas anxiety is different. Anxiety is something that is more able to be controlled by our thoughts. Now, what's hard is that we don't all have the same definition of anxiety or depression or anything. And so, like, some people can hear that and say, well, I can't control my anxiety. Well, maybe it is more technically hypervigilance that you have as opposed to anxiety. So from a neurofeedback perspective, from a brainwave perspective, our anxiety manifests in our betas. So we have low beta, mid beta, and high beta, and those are active thought processes. And so if I have someone who's hooked up and they have high beta, I can, in collaboration with them, tend to help get their beta down, so they don't feel anxious.
Right.
But if someone comes in and their alpha is high and they're really in hypervigilance, there's not much I can say that makes that go away, like in that period of time.
It takes time.
Right, it takes time. Alpha, it takes time. And even if you go out and you look up severe alpha intrusion, it's going to say there isn't much that you can do for severe alpha intrusion. And the reality is that's not true. Everybody that I've worked with who has stayed with the process, we have been able to get their alpha regulated. It may take a year and a half, but they're not increasing to incredibly high. I mean, we want our alpha to increase when we close our eyes 50 to 100%. And when someone comes in and it increases 200%, 300%, 400% when they close their eyes, particularly if staying in the process. I've never not been able to get somebody's alpha regulated in a way that they literally walk in the world differently, because it communicates within the whole brain and in the body better. And so just going back to the betas, again, they are more active brain waves. And it's like, so a simple problem, low beta, harder problem, mid beta, big problem, I need to fix it right now, high beta. And that could be like a really, like I'm in a math competition and then I need to figure out this problem. And it could be also, I need to open this jar of jelly because I have to leave for work in 20 seconds. But it's that, the higher level of, processing, that faster processing. And so we see when betas are high, again, outside that window, typically muscle tension, mind chatter, just an inability to relax. So, and then like the mid beta, what we call SMR, our sensory motor rhythm, when that's high, it typically manifests as depression, which is different than the type of depression when you have low brainwave amplitude. So you can have low brainwave amplitude and have depression. It's like that physical depression where, you don't have any energy in your body. You can't access it. And so your body is in huge parasympathetic or dorsal vagal place where it just is, there's no gas. And then you can have the depression that is an overactive brain, where it is, your SMR is just going. And so the depression comes from the brain's exhaustion, but it's because it's running, at 1,000 miles an hour. And so there's different types of depression. And so we can see that, on an EEG too. So what's helpful is even if someone doesn't do neurofeedback, doing a baseline is so helpful for us to understand, okay, this is mine, that's my brain and bodies. Like, this is my thoughts that are contributing to this experience.
Yes.
And this is a physiological communication issue that's happening that is contributing to my distress in whatever way.
Well, and I think what makes that the most important is then you can start getting better.
Yeah.
Because once you know
Yes.
where it's stemming from, and then you can work towards the steps that it takes to feel better.
Right.
And you can stop beating yourself up in your head,
Yeah.
which only makes the problem worse.
Right.
By getting support.
Right. And I think even even the coping mechanisms that can be suggested to us once we see somebody's brainwave activity can be more effective. So, asking, someone to, I'm just trying to think of something right now, asking someone to go exercise when their brainwave amplitude is so low that I mean,
They
for
just
me,
want to sleep.
they just want to sleep,
Mhm.
is asking them to do something that is likely only to bring them shame. And so trying to, work with them as a team. And okay, this is what I see. What is it that you think you could try based off what I'm seeing? Like, does this seem, achievable at all to you based off what I'm seeing? And so I think are the ways that we can, intervene are much more practical. Trying to give somebody a book to read who can't focus for more than 5 seconds, not helpful, right?
Yes. Gonna frustrate them even further.
Yeah. And so, it can help us be more helpful. I mean, this is the way that mental health is going. And it is changing. I hope it's in my lifetime that this is how we look at people first, taking that into account as opposed to just deciding things about them. Because even having done this now for over 5 years, sometimes I can look at someone and think, oh, based off what I'm seeing out here, maybe they'll have that. But the majority of the time, I'm not right when I guess. We have developed such great coping mechanisms,
right?
to make ourselves appear.
We put our mask on.
Put our mask on.
We're really good at that.
We're really good at that.
Yes.
And how we develop those masks, those coping mechanisms, is different for every person. And so trying to decide what somebody's brainwaves look like based off how they present externally is foolish. I mean, we cannot predict it that well. It just is difficult because, again, we all develop differently, and our brain, it just wants to keep us alive and do it as efficiently as possible. Our brain and our body isn't thinking, let's do this in a way that makes Tammy's life full of freedom and joy. It's not efficiency. It's not. It's just, it's about efficiency. It's an effective use of the energy that it has. And I would say that's another thing too, Tammy. With neurofeedback, when the brain is communicating much more smoothly, much more effectively, we literally have more energy to use to do other things.
Yeah.
And often people will say, oh, I don't want to do it because I'm really successful like this, and I do this really well, and I've never had anybody do neurofeedback who's like, well, crap, I wish I did it as inefficiently as before. Most people are like, I had no idea that I could actually accomplish more. But people are afraid that if they change their brain, they will actually function less efficiently. And that's just fear.
Right.
We've developed these coping mechanisms and competencies, so that we can achieve as much as we want to achieve. But we are not nearly as efficient as we think we are. It's amazing how much more I can accomplish now. I mean, I've always accomplished a lot, but what I can accomplish now is completely different because I'm not wasting energy like I did before.
Because you're optimizing your brain.
Right.
Now, I was reading somewhere that that neurofeedback helps to work on our subconscious.
Yeah.
Which helps to, I would assume, which I didn't read this, but I would assume that helps to get rid of any limiting beliefs too.
If we're working on it actively.
Okay.
Right. I mean, so when our central nervous system is better regulated, our negative or not helpful coping mechanisms, they don't need to come up as much. And does that make sense? They don't have to play as big a part because we're just better regulated. And so we have a better chance, if we're actively working on it, to change our deep stories, because our body is not always in as much resistance to change or whatever is happening in our life. Our body has a resistance to change. Again, it wants to do it efficiently, which is why it's so difficult for us to lose weight or start exercising or get up on time or get to work on time, because our body's like, why are you, like, I've figured out how to make this as efficient as I can, and you're trying to make me spend more energy changing it, And so when the body starts to have an experience of being more efficient as we make change, it's like, well, thank you very much for
thanks for helping
doing
me.
that. Yeah,
Let's continue this.
Right. Instead of expending more energy, you're actually, not creating more, but utilizing it better.
Utilizing your brain.
And the energy in your body.
For good versus evil. For good versus just random stuff.
And I would say too, what I think, one thing that I think is hugely important that we're in, a shift in too right now is brain injury. Brain injury for us, even now, is really still something where, someone was in a huge car accident and they got their skull cracked open and maybe they have a big scar, like that's someone with a brain injury. And that is not true. It just isn't true.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many people that I've worked with over the years who didn't even know they had one. Someone who had a car accident 20 years ago and started to struggle in their life, and then just, over years just got worse and worse and worse and worse. Trying medication, trying therapy, trying everything that they could think of. Coming in and doing a baseline and seeing their brain essentially what I call hibernation mode, like it's like gone into this dormant place. And so nothing they are going to do on their own is going to wake their brain back up. For some reason, the brain, whenever it decided to go into that place, whether it was 20 years ago or 10 years ago or 5 years ago, it's there now. And in that particular case, I recommended that she do electric shock therapy because I didn't know that I had enough time to get her brain woken back up before she took her life. And so, and it was a real contemplated plan because there were people gave up on her. People, her psychiatrists and her doctors thought she wasn't trying hard enough. No one was looking to see that her brain was shut down, essentially. And gosh, so that's been 6 years,
So you're relatively new.
Yes.
Practicing back then.
And had her go in and do some treatments, worked with the hospital to get that scheduled. And she is a fully functioning adult again, where she was someone who almost took her life because she had no hope. And it's just something we have to take into consideration seriously. And most people, if you ask them if they've had a head injury, they're like, nope.
Right?
Nope.
But you can have a head injury.
Car accident, falling off a bike,
dancing,
boxing, swimming. It just, with a lot of attention.
Bike accidents.
Bad bike accidents. It is amazing, really, the diversity of people, that come in, who, they have some awareness, but not enough to be like, oh. And then, people start doing neurofeedback, and then they're like, I forgot about this time, blah, whatever. The stories are crazy. The things that people are like, how did I even forget about that? Well, when we're told 25 years ago that bike accident where we smashed our face in, that we didn't have a head injury because the CAT scanner MRI didn't show anything, we devalue it in our own mind.
Yeah,
we just like, okay, well, it wasn't any big deal. They told me I could miss school the next day, but then I was back the second day. So how could that possibly 25 years ago be impacting me now?
I think what's really interesting about brain injuries and concussions, from my experience, is it's not like a broken arm.
Right.
And so people don't really understand when you have hit your head and you have a concussion, because it's not a visible injury that you should just be able to get up and go. But jam up, when your brain is not functioning, when it's been jolted, it is the weirdest feeling. That was probably the scariest time, because my brain actually was already not functioning because of the trauma of David dying, and the widow fog is what we call it. in the widow community is because you're in such a brain fog. We call it widow brain.
Right.
But then to go that next step and have a head injury and not be able to really put your thoughts together was scary.
Yeah.
Really, really scary.
Right.
And I'm just grateful to have had great mentors around me that were like, you know, you might want to check into that.
Head injuries, the concussions, it still doesn't yet have the value it deserves, but we're working on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are.
Glad to be able to hopefully put some of that out there and help educate people, because I think that it's really an important thing that people know about. Brain optimization, even if you don't have a head injury or ADD or depression, but just having optimizing your brain so that you can perform on a higher level is super sexy. It is like good stuff.
It is good stuff. Yeah, and we're learning so much right now about the brain. We thought we had figured it out, 30 years ago, that we knew the brain. We don't have a clue really how all of it works. I mean, the complexity is it is really, I think, unfathomable for us to understand the complexity of the brain. But it is, when it is working coherently, when it is, in symmetry, it is a beautiful thing. Yeah. So in Kansas City area, there are not a tremendous amount of providers. And, it continues to grow. Like I said, I speak on it regularly, and typically every time I do, there's somebody else that is like, okay, I need to be doing this. Another mental health provider who's like, you're right, I see this. I see so many people that aren't making the progress that they want, even if it's just a performance piece, and I'm giving them suggestions and it's not working, or they're whatever, there's some resistance that's happening. The people that really start looking at someone from that lens of brain communication it again just changes how you interact with them. Yeah. So.
It's cool. Very cool stuff. Well, thank you very much for coming
welcome.
And sharing more about neurofeedback. And hopefully, if anybody would like to get more information, how could they reach you?
Sure. So the website that we use for the neurofeedback is KCNPI, Kansas City Neuroplasticity Institute, kcnpi.com.
Okay.
And we do have a Facebook page as well. You can email me at Theresa at KCNPI, and it's THERESA at KCNPI.com. And it is, so there's myself and Brianna and Linda, and then we just hired another person to come in and
story, right? Just tell me your story. Yes.
Well, from the time that I was in 5th grade, I wanted to be an attorney.
Really?
Yeah. And so watching To Kill a Mockingbird, the justice piece, the advocacy piece was important. And so that's what my goal was. I mean, I even had license plates that said law to be on them when I was 16. That's where I was going.
Yeah.
And then I worked for law firms and, realized the story that I created in my head wasn't reflective of what the actual experience was. And it was just disappointing. And so, back then we could send in our resume to just a P.O. box, and we didn't know who we were applying to. I know. So
that seems strange. I kind of remember those days though.
Yeah, blind ads. And so, so I did, and I ended up working at an accounting firm and did accounting for a number of years, tax return preparation. It wasn't my degree was in philosophy. I was just good at it. And so I did that. And then my second son was struggling with he was 2, and I just knew something was like wrong. And back then, so that would have been 17 years ago, trying to find a therapist that worked with children was almost impossible.
Really?
And it isn't now. I mean, there's a lot of play therapists in Kansas City, but back then there wasn't. And then just going through the process with him was, it just clicked, like something clicked. And I decided I wanted to go back to school, reached out to the therapist that he saw and just asked her, like, how does this work?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, this isn't my degree, but I would recommend you get this degree. I think it teaches you best how to be a therapist. And I was like, okay, not really understanding exactly what she was saying, but trusting, her knowledge. And so I did, and went through get my master's degree, and then the whole post-grad piece, and then went into independent private practice. And that's what I've been doing since 2006. And interestingly enough, in 2012, my son that I had taken to therapy, years before, found a paper that I wrote in college that I have no recollection of at all, where it was a philosophy paper, and I was writing about whether I could be an attorney or a therapist. And I very clearly wrote out why I did not think I could be a therapist. And I had no memory of that period of time in my life that I was contemplating, being a mental health professional.
And that's a big difference
huge,
between
right?
Attorney or therapist.
Right. And so I don't know what that was about, because I don't remember, that period of time. And so there was obviously a draw that I've had for a long time to being a mental health professional, helping people, being an advocate, providing hope. And so I think the things that drew me into, law and accounting, curiosity, persistence, are things that have helped me as a mental health professional too. So over the years, a lot of my client population is what we call treatment resistant. And so they are people that have, been in therapy and just have struggled to find success,
right,
for whatever reason. And so for me, I'm not going to give up and trying to help people. I mean, if they're on board, let's go and let's figure this out, and whatever it is, to help them achieve what it is that they're trying to achieve. And I love it. I mean, I love what I do, and I love exploring new ways to help people. So for me, trying to find ways to, like, what speaks to someone's body, and we don't know that. We're pretty disconnected from our body experience. It's pretty much just our thoughts that rule, how we participate in relationship. And so for me, I'm always trying to explore new ways of helping people find what speaks to them. And so I take a lot of classes, go to a lot of conferences, try a lot of new things, to see what seems to be most helpful. And so for me, what I was running into as my client population grew into the treatment resistance was recognizing that there were people who, to me, obviously their brain didn't work well. Like there was something that wasn't happening that we would expect to be happening. And so it wasn't that they weren't putting forth effort, even if that's what they were told, or, by someone else, or by them, they were telling that story to themselves. There was just an awareness that this is like, something's wrong. Something doesn't communicate well in their brain. And so I